So speaking of today's session, without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers for today's webinar, who you can see at the top of your screens, Chris Collier and Gavin Boyle. Chris Collier is the resident futurist in Pearson's International Virtual Schools division, and Chris's education experience spans international schools in a variety of curricula, including academic, vocational and online, and he has worked across Europe, Africa and Asia. He currently leads the global development of online schooling for Pearson, and he works along with Harrow School Online, Pearson Online Academy, and helps partner schools around the globe embrace the benefits of online learning. And I'm delighted to welcome Gavin Boyle as well. Gavin is Director of Learning at St Christopher's School in Bahrain, where he enjoys transforming teaching and learning through the tools of EdTech, and he will share a lot more about that experience with you today. He's passionate about pedagogy and how digital tools deepen the learning experience. So welcome both, and over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Susie, and welcome everybody. It's an amazing range of countries, actually. It was almost, I was waiting to see if we get more than one person from the same place for a minute there, but we do have a few. But welcome to everyone from around the world. Delighted to be here with Gavin to talk to you about the evolving role of online schooling. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to sort of start up by talking about the projected future of schools, particularly pinpointing 2030 and how we think schools will evolve over that period, and particularly then obviously the role of online within those schools. I'm then going to bring it back to the present day and hand over to Gavin, who is one of the pioneers in this field with his school, St Christopher's, to talk about what they're doing today to make the sort of first steps on that journey. So one quick thing before I do, however, is to ask you a couple of questions just to get a bit of a gauge as to where you are all at with online learning yourselves. So firstly, I just want to know where your school is today. And there are 5 options here, which I'm just going to run through, and then we'll open up the poll in a moment. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is no learning happening online at all, and 5 is your school is a sort of fully hybrid institution with learning split between online and in person, where do you land? And just to explain on the others, number 2 is where you have occasional activities completed online, either at home or in the classroom. 3 is where you have a fairly regular stream of online learning happening within your student learning experience. And 4 then is when you're actually replacing some things that you would have done in years gone by in the classroom with something that you're now doing online. So if we could open the poll for that now. I see some of you are immediately jumping into the chat with that, which is great, but we are going to take a formal poll on it. So hopefully you can see the options there to take your pick, and we'll just give you 30 seconds or so to fill that in. And I can see from it's almost like a little preview from the chat as to what the answers are going to be. Some sort of conglomerates there around 3 with some 4s and even a 5, which is fantastic to see. Perhaps I should be handing over the webinar to some of you to tell us around things you're already doing, which is fantastic, and 100% online, which I confess I haven't put on an option here, which, given that I work with 100% online schools here at Pearson, I really should have done with a 6. If you're 6, please select 5, and that will give us the indication. Right, so the results should be up on your screen now. So you can see really interesting split there, actually, because the middle sinks in a bit. It sort of otherwise would look like a perfect sort of curve from 1 through to 5, but there's slightly more people who are either doing some activities online or at home, or indeed have replaced some elements of classroom teaching of online than that middle option. That might be my poor question phrasing, I suspect, around those points, but clearly there's a lot of work already going on online within your school, which is fantastic to see, and yeah, really, really encouraged by that. And I'm now going to ask you the same question, but casting your minds forward to 2030, where do you think your school will be? So if we can have the second poll now, please. So it's the same 5 options, but in 8 years' time, where do you think you'll be on that scale? And let's see what the difference between these 2 is. So I should say I can see the chat. I will try and sort of respond to bits and pieces, but if I don't get to that immediately, we obviously have a round up at the end, and there is a question and answer as well if you want to sort of log a question for us to pick up at the end. So you should have the poll up on your screen now to make your selection. And there we are, there are the results. So I love it when a plan comes together. We see here there is a definite shift down the scale, with just under a third, very nearly a third of you believe that in 2030 your school will be a hybrid institution, and then a strong majority then that believe that online learning will be taking over some elements of the classroom that either possibly it already has, given your previous answers, or will do more so in future. So very encouraging to see those results, because that's very much the theme we're going to dig into today. So thank you so much for that. So, as I said, I'm going to set the scene by talking about what schools will look like in 2030. And to do that, I'm going to draw on a few different data points to try and bring together a bit of a picture as to what we expect schools will look like. Obviously, we can't know, but there are clearly trends that we can tap into at this point, and then we'll bring it back to the present and what people can do now. And the first thing I want to draw on for that actually is to look at the way in which school and work have often imitated each other over time. So although I'm looking to the future, I'm going to start in 1930 and take a look at how schools and work used to imitate each other 100 years ago to see what lessons we can learn from that. And you can see from the two images we have here, just immediately there is an obvious visual semblance. On the left, you have a school where you have students working largely independently, completing repetitive tasks which require concentration and efficiency. Obviously, we know as educationalists that in this era, rote learning was very much a strong theme. The 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic would have been being taught. You have the teacher there sort of pacing around the classroom as a supervisor. And all of those things actually are so similar to the way in which that office is structured on the right-hand side. It is quite striking. And even though it wouldn't visually look quite as strong, you can imagine a similar semblance of a sort of factory work of that time, that obviously people would have been working, again, independently, monotonous tasks, trying to remain concentrated and complete the same task over and over again to high efficiency. And so whilst it's tempting to think of 1930 as just sort of an unenlightened era from a pedagogical point of view, as a place where we now know how learners learn better, and so we've moved on from this sort of focus on rote learning and from stifling students' creativity to a more expansive era, I think in a lot of ways actually that those classrooms were preparing learners for the kinds of work they were seeing in 1930. That actually the two do naturally imitate each other, because schools, one of the kind of fundamental tasks of schools is to prepare learners for the work they're going to do afterwards. And we saw 100 years ago that very strong semblance. Obviously, the thing that I want to do then next is think about, well, in 2030, how could that look, and how could a school in 2030 imitate work in 2030? So we have here a very different image of what work may look like in 2030. This is from Sagan Consulting, and it paints a picture where there is no sort of single physical environment anymore within work. And obviously there will be differences within this. This is going to be a sort of general piece, but where office work in particular is going to be replaced with a much more fluid and dynamic network of connections. We're going to be bringing people together from all around the globe, potentially some together in person, some together online, mixtures of the two, groups in person working with individuals online, groups online working with individuals in person. Well, I guess an individual in person effectively is online. But this sort of move away from any kind of core structure towards bringing together the people that are going to create the most value for that company, that economy, that society, whatever the outcome they're trying to achieve is, blending in people working with machines, people working with people working with people virtually, and everything in between. And obviously, if that is the way the world of work is going to be in 2030, and we can, I think, be fairly confident we're heading in that direction based on what's been happening over the last few years, the extent perhaps is up for debate, but clearly the direction is there. How could that be done in schools? Does this mean that schools are going to have to move away from being kind of the place of learning to a place of learning, where the 4 walls of the school become a key element of that learning experience, but not necessarily where all of the learning takes place? And obviously, to some extent, and based on your answers, I'm sure some of you are already taking that journey, but seeing that as a directional path towards something where the school increasingly becomes a sort of facilitative hub of learning, where people help guide learners towards the places they need to go to achieve their learning outcomes. So that's point one that I wanted to bring in. And I also want to look at what they will be learning in 2030 and how that might be changing over the next decade. And here I'm going to draw on the Future of Skills report that Pearson did with the University of Oxford and Nesta a couple of years ago, that just looked at all the different trends that are currently there in the world of work, such as automation, globalization, and a range of other factors, and projected from there which jobs are likely to grow over the next decade, and then which skills those jobs rely on, which skills will then become the most in demand in 2030. And it creates a very surprising list. You see on the screen here, it is unfortunately only UK and US that was studied, but I'm sure there are sort of general trends here that would be applicable to a much wider geographical audience. And the thing that strikes me sort of first about the list is if I had asked you what you thought would be on this list, I'd be quite surprised if many of these would have come up. They're not necessarily skills that are currently a focus in school. They're certainly not the sort of STEM focus that we've seen in the last decade being clearly represented here. It is different sorts of skills. And although it does look a little bit like a mess to begin with, no obvious patterns, there are some patterns within here that I do want to draw out. First of which is a focus around creativity. So there's a group of skills in here: originality, which is effectively coming up with new ideas, and fluency of ideas, which is coming up with lots of ideas. So there's a strong trend here towards that creative thinking element. There's also a second group that very much focuses around cognitive skills. There's a high level cognitive skills, being able to make decisions, deductive reasoning, complex problem solving. And I'd also throw into here a couple of these learning ones as well. So active learning in this context very much refers to adapting what you are doing as new information comes in, that sort of active learning process as you're working your way through a task. And then learning strategies, choosing the correct strategy to learn something for yourself or another, again, effectively is that high level cognitive piece, taking in a range of different factors and information and being able to make the correct decision. So a very key skill moving forward. And there's a final group here, particularly on the US side, around more social, more human skills: psychology, social perceptiveness, sociology and anthropology, and to a large extent, instructing sitting in there as well, that ability to understand other human beings and help them in some way, shape or form. So we have this group of skills, and I'm sure you'll all be delighted as educationalists to see just how much learning and educational terminology there is on this screen. But these groups of skills, effectively creative, social and cognitive, that I've drawn out of there. And I think the reason those are going to be so significant in 2030 is that these skills are effectively the sort of anti-computer. They are, to some extent, automation proof. Particularly, I think creative and social comes fairly intuitively. Computers are not great at being creative or being socially relatable. They obviously get better, but I think it'll be a long time until they can surpass a human being on that front. Cognitive skills might be more of a surprise, but I think actually if you look at where the sort of evolution of AI is, and I don't know how much people follow these, but you could see obviously certain instances of AI, like teaching a computer to beat the world's best player at Go, can be achieved, but the parameters there are very narrow. If you ask that same computer to give you an economic forecast, it wouldn't even know where to begin. And it's that more sort of general intelligence, that ability to understand a great range of factors, bring them together and come to conclusions, come to decisions, that is still very much in the human domain and likely to remain so for the foreseeable future. So we can see skills there. We can see structural challenges for the school. One final thing I want to bring in is how we will teach in 2030, and drawing here on a report from the OECD that talks about their new normal in 2030. And I do, similar to the previous report, suggest going and having a look at this. There's lots of fascinating insights within there. I've just tried to draw out a few pieces. And if you only got 2 minutes, there's a great video on YouTube that they've put up as well that sort of summarizes this. But effectively, the skills that the things that they see coming out more and more within schools and forming the new normal of 2030 is a much more personal approach. I'm sure that won't be surprising. Personalization is already a trend within schools, seeing that significantly increase. Greater student autonomy. It's greater ownership for the student of when, how, and what they learn, which I think is probably more of a challenge within existing school structures, but something that online can assist with, and that's obviously where we're heading in this session. Non-linear progress similarly builds on those previous two, allowing a learner to forge their own path. It doesn't necessarily have to follow a linear pathway. And then a couple of others that are around kind of wider inputs. So there's the wide-ranging feedback and wider community input. One of the questions we had in in advance of this webinar was around how employers and work can become more involved and how online can facilitate that. And I think online can play a really key role in enabling a school to connect with employers within their area, but also around the world. That sort of ability to bring in external guests and speakers and expertise greatly increases in an online connected world. And it's something that is very much likely to increase, and something that is needed really to push towards this more holistic educational experience that the OECD are projecting, where, as I've said previously, the school becomes that sort of hub of learning rather than being the sort of only player or the sole arbiter of learning. And then finally, that focus on well-being really draws out from a more holistic view of the student, that we are looking now not at a student being a collection of GCSE grades, but as being both their academic outcomes, mental well-being, their physical health, this much more holistic view of a student and how we can prepare them for the world, both in terms of their qualifications, and I'm sure there will still be qualifications in 2030, they may change, that's a topic for another day, but also coming out as sort of happy, contented citizens who are able to go forward and live fulfilling lives as well. So that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of what schools will look like in 2030, or what we are projecting. So in summary, a greater focus on creative, social and cognitive skills, a more personal, student-led style, moving further down that line of teachers being the sort of facilitators of learning in a much more fluid and responsive structure, where we may move away from students needing to be in the school all the time, having the same sort of timetables and so on, and breaking that into a more student-led approach where they are able to connect with the best source of value for their learning experience. So I'm going to hand over momentarily to Gavin, but just to sort of set the scene as to where we are today, and I think we are just about okay for time on that. What role does online learning play in this? So I'm going to leave most of this to Gavin and his example, but I do just want to set the scene, which is that there are, at the moment, I think, two sort of distinct areas in which online currently sits within schools. There is online within what we sometimes refer to as traditional schools or physical schools, and there are online schools themselves. And I want to make this distinction because I think online within schools largely focuses, and has done from its inception, on tools and resources. Obviously that is shifting, and I'm conscious of the answers you gave earlier that were surprisingly positive around the amount you've embraced online learning. But if you maybe think back a couple of years then for this, if you are in that position, online in schools typically focusing around tools and resources that either save money, save time, or in the best instances enable you to do the same sorts of things but do them better, particularly where you're able to connect with another community or expert or something like that, which the teacher previously would have had to learn about and sort of imitate for the students. They can now bring that experience in. So something like Mystery Skype, if you've ever come across it, is a great example of where you can actually do the same sorts of lessons better through the use of the internet, but it's still largely using tools and resources. Where I think online schools are distinct is because they're able to use asynchronous learning, student-led learning, where they're not having to be timetabled and necessarily with a teacher at a certain point in time. That enables much greater personal flexibility and much greater student autonomy. And they're able to start pushing towards that 2030 vision by virtue of having those lessons online, by giving students some choices around how they're going to learn, when they're going to learn, to a lesser extent what they're going to learn at this point, because the sort of structures they sit in are still the same, but ultimately giving them greater personal flexibility, and to some extent also giving them greater choice and access, because although we can't change these curriculums within which we sit overnight, you can now connect a student at any point in the world with a teacher at any other point in the world, which can be the sort of ideal match for those two. Or on a more practical basis, if you can't get a really good physics teacher in your local area, you can now have an online physics teacher teaching that student. And obviously in online school, that's the default position rather than a sort of extra step. So there is additional choice and access being seen there. And so you see within online schools, the sorts of benefits coming out that are a little bit different from what we've seen with online being used within a physical school, but also align very strongly with that 2030 vision. So I think what we will see over the coming decade is increasingly these two things coming together to enable physical schools to bring those sorts of benefits into their school. And on that point, I will hand over to an online pioneer himself, Mr. Gavin Boyle, who's going to talk about what he has been doing at St. Christopher's. So I will stop sharing my screen now, Gavin, and you can take the reins.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. Just 2 seconds while I share my screen, hoping that everyone can see that. Okay, let me just present that. So, yeah, fantastic introduction, Chris, and thank you for that. My name's Gavin Boyle. I'm Director of Learning at St. Christopher's School in Bahrain. If you're wondering where Bahrain is, I see that we've got a strong international community today, so I'm hoping that someone will have heard of little old Bahrain, but we are in between Saudi Arabia and Qatar here in the Middle East. So just to set the context a little bit about our school, we have been established since 1961. This is indeed our 60th anniversary. We are a 3 to 18 British international school, and we predominantly teach the British or the English national curriculum from EYFS all the way through to post 16, doing IGCSE, international A level, and we also do the IB diploma. We've got 2 campuses. We're 2,400 students, about 400 staff, so quite a large organisation, been established for a long time in Bahrain. Like many of you, we have been affected by the pandemic, and COVID-19 has brought us many challenges over the past 2 years, from full closure, where we had to go to remote teaching pretty much overnight, to then sort of getting back to normalcy, where we've had hybrid teaching, where we've had 50% of the students in on one day and 50% of the students at home, and then rotating alternate days. And we still have a few students who are fully remote, who have unique situations. However, despite those challenges of that situation that we didn't necessarily ask for, we've looked for the opportunities within that, and emerging, touch wood, from the pandemic. As a leadership team, we thought hard about the kinds of things that have been a great benefit to us. And one thing about the COVID-19 pandemic is that it has been probably the most immersive professional development for the use of technology, albeit in an emergency situation. However, it has opened our eyes to the possibilities. And the vast majority of our students, particularly in the senior school, a little bit different down in primary, where we do notice that fine motor skills, a bit of reading and maths, maybe not as far ahead as we would in a normal environment, but the vast majority of students, particularly the senior school, have continued to make good progress. And also, some students have made even better progress. And this is a bit anecdotal, but we've surveyed students and asked them for their opinions about remote learning. And yes, and certainly in the early days while we were finding our feet, it was a big change, but we've developed that pedagogy over the last 2 years. We've become very proficient at it. And some students have cited indeed that they prefer to learn without the distraction, with well-structured, well-sequenced lessons, where they've been able to make excellent progress. And we've actually seen that as they've come back into the classroom as teachers, how much they've sort of grown during that time. So in our visioning and sort of our strategic planning, we're looking at how, when we emerge from the pandemic, you know, again, what can we take forwards? What are the things that we want to lose in that? And what are the things that we want to change in terms of our traditional practice? And I'm going to be talking to you about some terms. We've got all these terms that have crept into our vocab, haven't we, at the moment, with asynchronous and synchronous. And I'm going to be talking to you about extended and blended, which I'll explain as we go along. But we first engaged with Pearson, looking at how we can take a more formal view to our online provision. And the Pearson Connects Us platform offers the opportunities for students to study IGCSE subjects in an online environment through their platform with a Pearson teacher. So we wanted to introduce this as a pilot to our students. We have a full range of students at St Christopher's. We're not selective, but we have very keen, very bright and motivated students. And we wanted to have a look at offering an extension of our breadth of curriculum to our students to complete outside of the traditionally taught curriculum. So this is what we call our extended model, and we offer computer science and we offer business studies IGCSE. We currently have 25 students from a mix of year 9 and 10 students. So again, not wanting to use the term accelerated, but we want to offer the students the opportunity when they feel they're ready to undertake a GCSE and not just restrict that to their age phase or indeed when they get to year 10. And that also allows us to adjust the number of concurrent GCSEs that the students will be examined in, because if they're taking them in year 9, they'll complete in year 10, which frees up a bit of time in year 11 for them to concentrate on other subjects. It's a 2-year course, just like a regular GCSE. It consists of one online lesson with a Pearson teacher, and our students are expected to complete around about 2 hours of self-study working through the platform independently per week. And the format and the structure of that pedagogical approach is that the online teacher would introduce the lesson and introduce the skills and the topics, maybe do some modelling and checking for understanding, and then the students go away and they complete independently the lessons through the platform. And then the next live lesson that's scheduled after school, students will join the meeting and the teacher will consolidate that knowledge, check for understanding, and then introduce the next. So it's almost like a peripatetic sort of model. If any of you are teaching children to play the guitar or violin or whatever, the 20 minutes that they see the peripatetic music teacher, that's not where the learning happens, that's outside. The role is to guide and to mentor that student and make them aware of their own learning and what they need to do and perhaps what they need to revisit. So the platform itself is very intuitive, very straightforward. The Pearson team have sequenced the lessons, organised in a folder structure. So term 1, lesson 2, etc. It consists of lesson objectives. There's usually a getting started activity, or a spark activity as it's sometimes known. There's some core content and then some activities that the students would engage with. And even some extended piece of work as well, so homework activities. So here's an example of a lesson with some learning objectives. It talks about key definitions and prior knowledge, and some of these terms are linked as well. So if it's introducing this terminology for the first time, the students can go and have a look at what is understood by that phrase or that term. So the sort of engaging activities such as flashcard sorting, sometimes there's videos, there is a lot of reading that students need to do through this as well. But again, having the access to the internet, they can go away and research and be a bit more independent in terms of finding out what some of these activities entail. There's also exam hints as well, so drawing attention to students, you know, that this is an idea to be aware of, because it's probably going to be asked or referred to in the exam, so that the students do find that helpful. There's assessment activities, and that can consist of multiple choice sorting exercises, and again, as I'm sure many of us use sort of Google Forms or Microsoft Forms within our teaching to gather feedback. But more importantly, this gives students the ability to get that instant feedback, check their answers as well, so they're not waiting for the teacher necessarily to give them the feedback on those results. And also short answer response questions, and again, these are timed, so the Pearson teachers and myself as a mentor who oversees this programme can look at the time that the students have spent on a question, and they can also compare their answer with the model solution as well. So they're getting that exemplar material, so we all know how important it is that the students know what the sort of the excellent answer, the full mark answer looks like, so they can compare that and make those comparative judgments for themselves. As a teacher, as I said, you get a whole range of analytics around this, so you can see the time that students have spent engaging in those activities. So again, we all know that fantastic, Tom, Dick and Harry have submitted a piece of work. If Tom's done that in 2 minutes, then that might not be challenging for him. If Mary has spent 2 hours on that, then she's struggled hard. The end result might be the same. So having sort of insights into how long students have spent on these activities is valuable in terms of checking for understanding and how you want to follow that up as a teacher or as an academic mentor for the students that we have through this programme. Students are also engaged with self-assessment, so they can rate their own understanding, their interest and their own effort levels. I always find it quite curious how us as teachers can rate effort levels. We can certainly look at engagement, but effort level is down to the student. So it's great that Pearson Platform asks the students to sort of rate their own sort of effort and interest and understanding as they go through each lesson. So quick sort of feedback from our students. We regularly review this, as this is a pilot for us with our group of 25. I'll just leave that there on the screen for you to read from a year 10 student and also from a year 9 student. So that's very, very reassuring for us. It's also very insightful that even students as young as year 9 are recognising that they need to be prepared for future online courses, and they're seeing this as very much a part of the way that they're going to get access to education when they go on to further education, but also when they enter the world of work as well. From a teacher perspective, there are 3 of us at the moment that mentor the students on the pilot. And what do we feel? Well, certainly we see increased learner independence. Gone are the days where a student needs to be sat in front of a teacher for all of the allocated curriculum time. If they've got a well-structured, well-planned, well-sequenced platform that's accessible and engaging, then they can work through that at their own pace. They can go back and repeat where they feel they need to, and we no longer need to hold them back. If they're ready to move on, then they can move on. We also see a development of a range of key skills. So again, it's very different than emergency teaching. There's a lot of skill to engaging online through an online platform, participating meaningfully in Google Meets or Zoom meetings, etc. These are key skills. Time management, reflection on their own learning, that sort of independence to go away and problem solve when they can't necessarily do something straight away. And we can leverage the benefits of the online platform, the analytics, the statistics, that information. It makes the learning more visible for us. So if there is any intervention, then clearly we can be intelligent about that rather than just making assumptions. So what's the next steps for us at St Christopher's? Well, we have some problems to solve. Curriculum pathways being one of them. And currently at Key Stage 4, our students are on this single pathway of doing 11 GCSEs. Is that appropriate for all students? Well, clearly not. Do students need 11 GCSEs? Chris talked about the skills from the OECD, and behind me you will see our Future Ready curriculum, where we have a focus on developing competencies. Some people say 21st century skills, etc., soft skills, but leadership, enterprise, well-being, metacognition, service-led learning, all of these skills we want to develop through our students, but we can't while we have a full curriculum of 11 GCSEs, and it's not appropriate for all students. Also in our region, the local economy is changing. We're seeing the landscape change in terms of expatriate families. With COVID, we've seen, you know, we're quite a transient island anyway, but a lot of families are forced to be displaced because of economic challenges, where they have to return to their home countries or are forced to move on. And it's very sad for us as an international school to lose those students. And it'd be very, very sad when that is in the middle of a GCSE. However, in this model, we would still be able to deliver our education programme and to our students and families, because we remove the barrier of being in Bahrain to receive that. And there's a competition among private schools. So we've enjoyed being, you know, a very successful and leading school in Bahrain, if not in the international community, for a long, long time. But a lot of schools now are starting up in the region, in the area. We have to differentiate ourselves, because we have to make sure that we're addressing the needs and desires of students and increasing the breadth and range of activities that we can offer to make us more competitive. So what might that look like in the future? This is where we are heading to, perhaps as early as next academic year, where Pathway 1 for the moment will look very similar to what we have at this current moment in time. Students will have the option to take 11 GCSEs in the traditional model, but they will have the option for the extended model to do even more GCSEs, maybe things that we don't necessarily offer in school, outside of the school time. And the option for the extended non-examined, that's the non-E. So courses like public speaking, critical thinking, leadership, and those types of things that we do for our Future Ready curriculum. But again, we can't package that into the school day. There's only so many hours, so that would be as the extended model that students could dip into outside of the traditional school timings. In Pathway 2, we would offer the students a choice to choose between 7 or 9 IGCSEs taught in the traditional way, with the option for blended. And when we talk about blended, that's blending that into our school day. So a problem with reducing from 11 GCSEs to 7 or 9 is, what on earth do you do with those students when they're not sitting in front of teachers engaging in those lessons? Well, having a platform like the Connexus Pearson platform with online teaching solves that problem, because like with our sixth form students who have supervised study areas, we can create these spaces in our physical school where students can go. They will be supervised by a member of staff, but they'll be engaged and they will have the time to work through these platforms within the school day. So that would give them an option for the blended IGCSEs, and that might even involve some of our teachers using the Pearson platform to deliver those lessons, where we can have larger cohorts of students through a single teacher using this platform. And we also can have the option to bring our blended non-examined courses into the school day as well. So again, not relying on students having to work outside of the school timings. And Pathway 3 might be for our lower attaining students who need to spend more time on fewer subjects to increase their success. Again, we want to be inclusive, giving them the option for blended and non-examined courses. We don't feel at this time that particular band of students, the sort of blended self-directed online IGCSE courses is probably for them. They need a bit more intervention and teacher support and scaffolding around that. However, underpinning all of this is our extended IGCSE and extended non-examined courses. So giving the opportunities for all students, regardless of pathway that they choose, to engage in this curriculum innovation. So I'm going to hand back to Chris because he's going to host the questioning. But if you want to reach out to me, then my Twitter is gboyuk. Please give me a follow on there, and you can message me directly. And if you do have any specific questions, then speak to Chris and the team, and they have my email. And I'll be happy to take any questions from the wonderful audience today. So I'll stop sharing my screen now and hand back to Chris.
Great, thank you, Gavin. So I think we're ready for questions and answers if we want to get into those.
Sure, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gavin. That was wonderful. So we have a couple of questions. We're slightly running over, but we'll get through the ones that we've got. So this is a question from Paul Sonara. These developments work particularly well for older students, as I can see how students could work from home or anywhere in the world. But how do experts see this move to online schooling working for parents of younger students whose parents are at work? Part of a school's role is surely just to gather students together in a safe and supervised environment. So yeah, what's your view on that, Chris?
It's an excellent question, and I think this sort of dual role that schools play in childcare and education really came into focus during the pandemic. Certainly when students weren't able to go into school, they could still potentially learn, but obviously parents picking up a lot of that childcare caused 1,000 memes to be launched. So we became very acutely aware of that. I mean, to some extent, there's a friction there that you've identified that is very much real. You know, if you have a student who is 5, 6, 7 years old, they cannot work unsupervised. They're going to have to be supervised in one way, shape, or form. That probably means that the evolution of or sort of bringing online in at that age is going to take a bit longer. I mean, we do have online schools that operate at that area, but it does rely on a parent or a grandparent or someone to be there with them. If we're going beyond that, we'd have to find some other solution for the childcare piece. One of which we may see, if we get to a point where online passes a certain critical mass, is that you might find sort of study centres or places where students can go and learn online, which aren't necessarily staffed with expert teachers, but more childcare professionals. There may be some sort of fluidity that could come in there, but clearly that is a challenge. It's a very real challenge that will remain. Exactly what age children can sort of switch between one and the other is slightly up for debate, but clearly there is an age and a significant part of primary school where the children would have to be supervised in one way, shape or form.
Brilliant, thank you. An internet cafe for children. I like that.
Indeed.
There's two questions here in the chat. So one from Alexander and one from Vanessa, and they're kind of linked. So I'm going to ask you those, Gavin. So the first one from Alexander is, what do parents think about the online learning you're trialling? And then Vanessa's asking how your teachers feel about this, whether they feel supported or whether it's been a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of parental engagement, or the feedback that we've received so far has been excellent, because the Pearson platform allows what they call an observer account, where the parents can log into the system to see effectively a read-only view of what their children see. So they can see the progress, they can see the engagement on the lessons, what have been completed so far. They can have those discussions around, with the students, what have you been doing with online business studies? Well, it's there for them to see, so they can talk about, public limited company or whatever it is, and offer that parental support. And we see education very much as that student, parent, teacher sort of tripartite relationship. And it is amazing when you can give that visibility to parents, and some relish in that, and others don't feel the need to, and that's absolutely fine as well. But it is there if they want to. Just touching back to the previous question as well about online primary education, that's something that has been interesting to us as a through school, and we've had a number of families that have been displaced and have continued to engage at St Christopher's, even though they're no longer in the country and haven't been for some time, but they feel that the education that we've offered through our online teaching and Google Classroom, etc., and Google Meet has been superior to what they can get in perhaps the country that they are. They've continued to pay their fees and engage in that. So, and that's been very interesting as well. And in terms of our teachers, at the moment, it hasn't really impacted much on our existing teaching staff, because obviously we use the Pearson teachers, but our intended blended model, we have a number of interested teachers who see the benefit of you know, developing their skill set to teach in this way. I think they see that this very much will become a part of mainstream in the not too distant future, and they're very excited about that opportunity and what that brings. And you know, some of the discussion that I've had is that, you know, we've been spoon feeding children far too long the content, and you know, doing the hard work for them. And in some cases that is absolutely needed, you know, to support the children that are in our care. But in other situations, we want the students to become independent learners, autonomous learners. We want them to be able to, you know, and we know ourselves that, you know, students will go out and watch YouTube and will discover and learn things beyond the classroom to a really, really high level. And we want that to be around the subjects that we teach, because that leads to more meaningful and they have a greater understanding, a deeper understanding of the subjects, which would lead to higher engagement, motivation, and will lead to a success.
Brilliant, thanks Gavin. I'm going to turn now to a question that was submitted prior to the webinar. So this question is from Laura Mitchelson from the Innovation and Impact Unit at Dwight Schools, Shanghai. And Laura says, I'm interested to see what you guys think of the role of business might be in giving students a deeper understanding of real life challenges and global world views. Since learning facilitation looks different with online learning, maybe those facilitating that learning can also be different. And she's asking if you have some examples of that in action, and if you do, what challenges came up?
So shall I start with that one? So I think I very briefly touched on this in the presentation, but I'm glad we get a chance to sort of go back and talk about it in more detail, because I think bringing in sort of industry experts, particularly into kind of later years of curriculum, things like business studies that Gavin's been talking about, is a sort of obvious win for this setup. And I think, you know, it clearly should be increasingly possible if you can connect people virtually. You know, bringing someone out from a local business for a morning to do a seminar to sort of school children or whatever is possible and has been done and is still done and is a valuable experience. But if you can more easily and readily get hold of a range of people from a much wider group, clearly they can get involved in passing on their experience, and potentially that then evolves to a sort of teaching group or unit where possibly you could sort of see future social corporate responsibility programs involving actually some of their staff taking a few hours a week to help teach groups of students to input into a more formal educational plan. So I think that's definitely a really exciting area that very much fits within the pitch we put for 2030. At the moment, it is still the latter. You know, so within our existing online schools that we have, so as Susie's mentioned, we have, you know, Harrow School Online that we work with, Pearson Online Academy in the UK, and then also our United States schools. It is more bringing people in to do kind of expert sessions. The challenges are still basically the same. It's the usual sort of safeguarding you know, bureaucracy effectively around that, which doesn't radically change actually, even if you are bringing people not into physical contact with the learners. Maybe that's something that over time could make things more seamless, but obviously that's still going to be a part of any future session, any future involvement as well. So at the moment, it's still fairly much as it has been, but online instead of in person. But I'd love to see that evolve as we move forward. And Gavin, I don't know if you've anything to add to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's really where our sort of non-examined extended model or blended model comes into play. So, for instance, this year we've had some sessions by an expert in the field on public speaking, and you know, she usually works with high corporates worldwide, big corporate companies. And she came to do some sessions with not only with our staff but also with our students as well. And you know, to get these people into a program where it might be 3 or 4, 5, 6 weeks, manageable blocks, and these you know, fantastic, inspiring people which we want to give exposure to our students. And absolutely, with the safeguarding, you know, we need to make sure that that's maintained, and it's always with you know, physical members of our teaching community that we facilitate that. But again, for our students to have that experience and to work with these people, and if we can get certified courses like mini MBAs or introductions to this, that and the other, you know, by these experts in the field, then it really does heighten you know, engagement for students, but also the quality of that provision as well. And that also branches off into our online summer school and winter camp and things like that, where we can, you know, some fun activities as well, STEM, STEAM, but also preparation for university and things like that, and getting people who are already in the field of medicine talking what is that like when you get to university, what types of challenges do you face, how can you prepare to do that, offer some tips and some advice. So yeah, I think it's essential.
Yeah, there's huge opportunity there, isn't there? Sort of an online mentoring program can develop around this and give those students the skills that they need to sort of take their place in the global workforce. We are running low on time now, so there's a question here for Michelle, and I can see that Chris is answering some of the questions in the chat, so thank you for Chris. Anything that we don't get to before the top of the hour, we will take offline and answer. But Michelle is asking, this one's for you, Gavin, do you have online learning within your face-to-face teaching or just within the Pearson platform?
At the moment, we're still suffering the effects of COVID, so we do what we call hybrid teaching. So the clear majority of our students are now back in our classrooms, thank goodness, but we're still suffering from students who have COVID and are isolated and cannot come into school. So we do the hybrid teaching, where very much like this, you know, we'll have a class of 25 students and you know, we'll engage through Google Classroom and Google Meet with the students at home and the ones in lessons as well. It's the most difficult mode of teaching. You know, I think if you speak to all of our students, it's either let's get them all online or let's get them all in the classroom. I think it's very difficult to split your attention between those two modes. So we don't blend the two together, and I don't think we see that as a vision going forward. However, we have talked about looking at students who might not necessarily be in Bahrain or be able to afford the full sort of package of physical school, and maybe how we could blend that two together, but that's way in the future.
That links nicely. It's almost like we planned it to Vanessa's question, which is, are your fees for online the same as live school fees for displaced families?
At the moment, yes, they are, because the Ministry of Education here stipulate that we have to offer online. So therefore that's absolutely what we will adhere to do, and therefore it makes that viable for parents who have moved away, and there are some families who are still in Bahrain that need to be online. So we can't make that differentiation. If in the future, if we were to set up an online primary school, for instance, which we've talked about, then those fees would be reduced because they wouldn't have the demand on the facilities. We are not-for-profit, not-for-profit school, so everything goes back into the development and the maintenance of our school. And again, with the Pearson platform that we use for the extended model, you know, we don't make any money on that at all. Those costs are just passed straight through to parents. So you know, we try and keep education as low cost as we possibly can for the highest quality.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. I think we've answered all of your questions, and what a lovely lot of questions they were. I can see that everybody has held on. So we were meant to finish at 1:45, and it's delightful to see pretty much the entire audience has stayed. So I think, chaps, you can take that as a real positive sign of how well your content has been received today. So thank you to both of you, Chris and Gavin, and to everyone else who has joined us here today. Certificates of attendance and a digital badge and a link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to you by email tomorrow. And before we finish, I'll just give a quick plug for the other Big Thinks in our series. So if you've missed any of those, you can find recordings of all of the 10 webinars so far, and then latterly this one, on the Big Think webpage. So do check them out and keep an eye out on that same page for the next webinar in our series, the details of which we will be announcing soon. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you all have a very good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.